We'll do it live.
Okay.
We'll do it live. Fuck it. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live.
Hello, this is Dylan Moore and Nima Dylan of irresponsible. It is Tuesday, September 6, 2022, and we are here doing it live. And we've got a controversial and exciting topic for you today. If you don't leave here pissed off, we haven't done our job. Today we're going to be making the conservative case for student debt forgiveness. Nima, can you believe that? Even putting that sentence together. Can you even believe that about hearing that sentence? I know you can, but why do you think, you know the answer, why do you think conservatives have such a hard time with the idea that people's debts should be forgiven? Student debts in particular.
Because it's a handout, and if you've made stupid choices, if you made bad decisions, you have to pay for it, and it would be a moral hazard. It would be incentivizing people the wrong way to do debt forgiveness. It'll cause inflation, of course, hyperinflation, maybe even.
I think it's a good list.
I've paid off all my student loans, so why can or also somehow. All the people who are against debt relief are always suggesting that they're paying for someone's debt relief, just that their tax money is somehow paying for it, which I haven't seen that equation or that money flow explained quite yet.
Well, and if you didn't understand the economic system or the money system correctly, I could see how you could come to that conclusion, don't you?
Yeah.
So as Nima and I have discussed on multiple fronts on this show, that we more or less subscribe to an economic theory called MMT, modern money theory, which, you know, we're not going to sit here and break down the whole thing as it stands, but if we had to say it in one sentence, it's rejecting the barter theory of money and understanding that the credit theory of money is the accurate way of understanding the monetary system. And when you have the understanding of the credit theory of money and you recognize the fact that the sovereign, which in this case is the federal government of the United States, has the sole issuing capacity to create money, with a little asterisk next to that. I mean, we talked about this in the last show with the in quotes private banking system. Yes, private banks also create money, however they do so with the license from the federal government. That if there's this money issuing authority, then the rules work a little bit different than you think they would if money was based off a system of barter, where the money is somehow in the environment and we have to go dig it up, like for example gold or silver. We have to physically go dig it up. So I want to start with the point about inflation, because that's it's really silly once you look at the way that actually works, right? Because if we look at the student loans, when Nima got his student loan, or if anybody else gets their student loan, a bank generates a student loan. And as we talked about before on the show many times, particularly in the last show, that when a bank creates money, it creates it out of nothing. I mean, excuse me, when a bank gives a loan, it creates that money out of absolutely nothing. There's no reserve requirements. There's no multiplying of reserves. There's no money multiplier. There's no moving deposits around or anything like that. The money gets created on the spot. So if a student gets a student loan, the money gets created on the spot. They spend it at the university, and then they carry around the debt for forever and on. And then I apologize. I got COVID last week. I still can't smell a damn thing. So I'm going to be coughing into this microphone and hopefully infect everybody through the airwaves. Hope you got boosted 47 times. So if that money gets created on the spot, gets spent on the spot, then that means however much student debt is out there right now, the inflation has already occurred.
Yeah, and tuition.
Go ahead.
Tuition prices, have been rising consistently and constantly. So that's one aspect of the inflation. And then obviously there's the inflation of the people who receive the money, then go out and spend it. And have they produced any goods and services? Well, they're providing education, but the education is overvalued, I would argue, because the demand has been. You don't produce any. I mean, the problem with the student loans has been that they can't be bankrupted out of there. So it's a very safe loan to make for the bank, I guess, if it's the only kind of debt remaining that people can't bankrupt out of, then you're very unlikely to have to write down that debt, right? It's like a very convenient situation for the bank to be in, to be able to force to make the borrower repay it, no matter his ability or not to pay. So then they've made these loans without productivity assessments in mind, which a good bank and a good loan, those would always be characteristics of a good loan, right?
That's like the key component.
Right. It's like why you make a loan.
This back? Can this business produce enough money to pay this loan back?
So if the loans could be bankrupted out of, and if there was no Community Reinvestment Act and like policies that, and then plus on top of that, a lot of these loans are just bought up by federal agencies. So ultimately, the banks themselves probably aren't even really sitting on that debt all that much anymore. It's just all ended up with Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, one of the two. I'm not sure which one buys up these student loans. And so now it's on the balance sheet of the government. And if the payments are made, the money just ends up in the coffers of the government. In other words, it just gets subtracted from the private sector.
It gets destroyed.
And it gets destroyed for all practical purposes. Yes. Now, the thing is with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they were actually semi-private institutions. So there's shareholders who would receive some of the profits. However, I don't even really know how profitable these institutions have been. I mean, they were completely bankrupt. It's from what I recall, post 2008, and restructured a dozen times or whatever. So I don't even really know if anyone really cares about these student loans and the quality of these loans. I mean, I guess the banks have been bailed out already, which, that I agree that shouldn't have happened. But at this point, where are we at? What's the situation who benefits from the continued existence of these loans on the balance sheet, and who suffers from it? And who suffers, obviously, number one is obviously the students who have to repay these loans. But then number two, it's the people whom those students could have been buying things from with the money that they could have actually spent in the private economy versus having it destroyed by the federal government. So there's a conservative perspective, I guess, for you.
And then if we want to look at this, because the whole thing, going back to what you said, like, hey, you took the loan, you need to pay it back. You signed the dotted line, so on and so forth. Well, I don't think that's a fair assessment, because these are loans that are typically aimed at people who just graduated from high school. They've been told their entire lives that the way to get ahead is to commit themselves to higher education. They get this paper slid in front of them when they're 18, which is before their brains are fully developed, right? Your brain's not fully developed until you're 25, right? Before your brain's fully developed, you sign that line that says, hey, this will help you get to the stage in life where you're supposed to get. It takes you 4+ years to acquire that degree and then move on to start finding out that the promise was fake. And by that time, it's too late. It's way too late. And so I think at a moral level that, this is like, let me back this up and say, if the people were 17 when they signed, everyone would go, oh my God, well, you signed with a minor and therefore it doesn't count. because that's the law, right? Oh, now they're 18 and okay, they're responsible for everything, right? Well, they went through a system that conservatives recognize is absolute brainwashing.
Well, to make the ridiculousness more apparent, let's say they're on the last day of their 17th age.
Yeah,
and they sign this thing. That's completely irresponsible. You can't make a minor sign. But a day later, they can suddenly assume all these responsibilities. They've acquired perfect knowledge overnight. I guess they had a giant crash course while sleeping or something. That obviously makes no sense.
Well, and then let's look at the debt itself, because, okay, it's not the same as a car debt. It's not the same as a house debt. It's not the same as a gambling debt or anything else, because you can't bankrupt out of it, like you said.
Well, yeah, and the attribution of responsibilities is skewed. You know, it's not it's not necessarily the borrower's problem if the borrower can't repay the loan. Whose problem is it?
Everybody else's. The banks.
Well, it's the bank. It's the bank's problem, right? So the banks should have made these loans with that responsibility in mind. But I did not know this on your last show where you went on Tommy Nation Politics. You mentioned that these loans are actually made pretty, rubber stamped pretty much.
That's I never got one. My understanding is that if you ask for one, you get one. Period.
Well, and it seems to be true. I mean, the vast majority of people that we know have gotten this loan, and I guess the backing is that, hey, I'm getting this, I've been accepted to this college, and I'm going to make a bunch of money later on. And so that's the rationale of the bank. However, the banks, for reasons that, we mentioned earlier, subsidies and unbankruptability of the loan, etc., these banks are making these loans pretty easily when they should, in fact, be very careful, heavily scrutinize. Okay, what kind of degree are you gonna get, and then what's the average income when you get that degree, and all those things. I'm sure there's
and we want to see progress reports. We want to see your grades as you're going through this to make sure that you're actually going to be good at getting this.
Well, right, attendance, etc. I've heard that there's been cases where students would just use all the money to rent a penthouse suite in Manhattan and never even show up in college.
I don't think you can do that anymore. I think they check and make sure that you've like actually registered for the classes, but I don't think anybody's making sure like you're, how's it going? Like, are you doing well? Or do professors like you? Or do you like the professors? Like, are you feeling it, buddy? Right before we sign on to 3 more years of this stuff.
Right. So if we want to talk about moral hazard, where is the incentives that make the banks behave better down the road if we keep forcing these students who had no clue what they were doing at the time they signed these things to make these payments?
They didn't just not have no clue. They were told by the entire society that was the right thing to do. Right? By the parents, by the schools, by the TV, by the blah, 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 blah. The whole society looks at you and agrees, yeah, you should be doing that because a higher education is the most important thing that you could be doing.
That's what that's maybe a little biased towards the student side because I didn't do it, you didn't do it. So there have been people who and also there's this argument from the other side has always been around. Don't go in debt too much, and acquire a skill that's actually useful. And there have been people who've done that, right? Who went to a vocational school or whatever, and actually ended up doing much better than the majority of students who are in huge debt now.
Well, and then I don't think there's nothing to the conservative argument of a moral hazard of just
right.
Forgiving these loans, because they can go on and say, well, what about my house loan? What about my car loan? What about this? What about that? And I think there's a point there. The difference, I think, is twofold. A, the fact that there was this brainwashing for the entire childhood, and then as soon as they turned 18, here's this document slid across the table. Boom. Okay, you're in. And then on the back end, you can't bankrupt out of it. And even that alone isn't enough for me to say, okay, relieve it. What's enough for me to say relieve it is we have now a massive chunk of the most productive generation in our society, you know, the 20 to 30-year-olds, in debt that they can't get out of. And like Tommy was saying in the show that I was on with him, he's got a student loan, and that the second he quit paying it, his wages were garnished. And it's been a while since I've seen an article like this, but I have seen articles in the past where, hey, you quit paying your student loans, and then bam, you can't get your driver's license anymore. And so basically, it's this societal debt placed on supposedly the most productive generation that there is. You know, post 20s, between your 20s and 30s, when you're supposed to be getting a job and getting married and having kids and that sort of thing. Put them
the greatest potential.
Put them all into debt that they can't get out of. Excuse me. And then make it so, and then punish them ruthlessly for it. And so I think my moral opinion is that we need a one-time Jubilee style debt forgiveness that wipes it all clean, and maybe even going back a few years to reimburse people who had just paid them off, just for good measure. If anything, as an apology to all these students who, and again, yes, there's some exceptions and people who made it through and they got good jobs and paid it off and so on and so forth. But as an apology for sending an entire generation into the meat grinder of what's supposed to be a good institution, or a good institution for, you know, developing you as a productive member of society to benefit yourself as well. However, I say that at the same time, I don't take the leftist view of just like, oh, just make it free forever, because no, there is a moral hazard on the sense of the universities and the banks here. We just get free money for everything? Well, because I mean, like you mentioned with the banks, if this is guaranteed by the government, I don't have to work hard to make a good decision of whether or not this person can pay back. Well, same thing with the universities. They don't have to go, well, are we delivering good education or not? I don't know. Who cares? We get paid anyway, right? So, at the very least, on top of the debt jubilee, student debt jubilee, I believe that at the very, very least, that these loans have to be bankruptable again. If they're bankruptable again, I think the whole landscape changes.
Yes, and also another option would be, which is a little milder than your suggestion of just giving.
That was mild. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, just giving blanket debt relief to everyone. That's like, how's that mild?
Sorry, I thought you were talking about the make it bankruptable part of what I said. I'm saying is, instead of a jubilee, why not just make all student loans bankruptable? All present and past. I mean, the ones that have been paid off, but the ones that are partially paid off, etc. People are struggling enormously. Well, even if it's bankruptable and someone decides to bankrupt out of it, you're still killing your credit for 7 years. And you have to go through the process of a bankruptcy. I mean,
that's why it's a milder version of what you just suggested. Okay. That's all I'm saying, right?
I see.
There would be some tough love involved in that approach, but still, at least there is a light at the end of the tunnel, right? There's a process of throwing off this scourge that's hanging over you, and then moving forward from there. But yes, I agree with what you're saying. It would cause some hardship to some extent still.
And I want to bring up the inflation again, because this is you got to understand the economic system and how it works in order to understand this. Is that what the conservative side is worried about is, let's say there's like $1 trillion in this debt. That's the number I've heard flying around, right? And they say, oh my God, if we forgave that debt, that would flood the economy with another $1 trillion. No, it wouldn't, because it's already happened. Like I said,
right.
the loan's made, the person gets the money, they spend it at the university, it's out there, it's done, it already happened, right? And if we're to forgive the debt, that doesn't introduce more money. All that does is just a bookkeeping entry, where especially if it's now run by the federal government, they just go, well, we just won't collect on that anymore.
Yeah.
Done.
Now, it would certainly cause because if if a liability, which is basically a negative asset, gets removed from individuals' balance sheets, then that's by how much their spending power, at least psychologically, goes up.
Mm-hmm.
But will they spend all that money recklessly? If they do, then that's where the flooding of the market comes into play.
Right,
but that's far from guaranteed.
There was a drain, right? Because as these loans get paid off, that's a drain on the money in the system, and by forgiving it, it's not that you're putting more money in the system, but you are stopping the drain that was there.
You're stopping the drain, and you are now freeing up spending power for the country's businesses.
Yes.
So it's you and me who, at the end of the day, would be receiving more money than we did before the Jubilee.
Right, because there'd be that much more money. There'd be, in quotes, $1 trillion more, potentially. Well, that's not good math.
There's $1 trillion debt removed, and whatever that means to the individuals who've been affected by that, whatever that means to their balance sheets, they're going to be able to spend some more on the businesses, on the real economy, versus sending money to a black hole and letting it disappear from the private sector. Because, as we mentioned, a lot of these debts are basically sitting on the balance sheet of banks that are wholly or largely owned by the federal government. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
And I do want to add this. Let's say it was inflationary. Let's say that there would be a significant inflationary effect to this. Who cares? Right? I mean, the government regularly spends trillions of dollars on world-destroying bullshit.
Yeah, I mean,
all the time.
This would not even be government spending. This would all be private spending. All right? So it would be spending that's done to fulfill private desires and needs and demands.
Right, as opposed to how many billion... Are we up to $1 trillion sent to the Ukraine yet? I mean, how many trillions of dollars are spent on Iraq? How many trillions of dollars are spent in Afghanistan? We've thrown this money multiple times, this way and that. What about all the COVID money that came in? All this.
Well, yeah, the COVID money went into the trillions. Definitely, Ukraine. I doubt that it's $1 trillion.
But at the rate we're going, yes.
We sent the U.S. government has sent billions of dollars to the Ukraine.
So, because I mean, think about it. If the entire productive generation that's currently under debt slavery is suddenly not under debt slavery, yes, there are going to be some people who spend that money recklessly, and maybe a lot of them are going to spend their money recklessly, but a lot of them aren't, and a lot of them could go back to being productive.
Yeah.
They can work for the economy, and they can start having kids again.
Yes, it's 10.6 billion apparently as of August 19th.
Okay, that's way less than I thought it was. They're slacking.
Well, this Ukraine thing is not, it's not anything more than a little welfare program for the country's arms manufacturers. I think they don't really care all that much about the outcome. They've probably accepted the fact that Russia is ultimately going to crush them, the Ukraine. But in the meantime, they can still keep the conflict going, maybe inflict some minor losses on the Russian side. Part of it, it's maybe a poor execution of the ancient British strategy, which has always been about supporting the weaker side on any given war on the mainland of Europe, so that there's this attrition happening. Because why support the stronger side? And the stronger side is already winning anyway. You're not getting anything out of it. But if you can sort of support the weaker side and get some benefits in return, and watch
and
them
have a weakened state left over, yes.
Right.
I also wanted to mention. So we've talked about this multiple times, and from an MMT standpoint, which is the fact that if the government has the sole issuing authority of money, and it causes you to have to pay a tax, it logically follows that the government has to give you a means by which to pay that tax. Now, a student debt isn't necessarily a tax, but it kind of sort of is, especially if you owe it to the federal government and you can't bankrupt out of it, right? Yep. And the entire government school apparatus drifted you toward that direction to begin with. So it's kind of sort of a tax. So, right. We've talked about that. This is where something like the federal transition job conversation comes in, where we say, okay, the government needs to give you a way to pay this off, to pay this tax. Well, in this case, if the government is responsible for getting you in this mess, which it is with the student debt mess, then it has to provide a way of getting it out. And, you and I have talked about backward and forward, even with all this crazy COVID spending and stuff, that the economy currently doesn't have enough private sector net savings because we've got unemployment and we've got underutilized capacity. So if we're in a cash-starved situation and we've got all these people loaded up to the gills with debt, it's very, very reminiscent of ancient Sumeria, as we've mentioned occasionally here. So we're both fans of a book called Debt: The First 5,000 Years by David Graeber. Yes, in fact, both of us were. I got my copy over here too. We were flipping through it before we started the show. But in the book, David Graeber actually goes over the fact in ancient Sumeria, we're talking, like 3000 BC onward, that debt slavery was such a huge problem that it was a constant problem with the farmers, that the farmers would take out commercial debts, have a bad year, be unable to pay the debts back, and then become slaves to the person who lent them the money. And which is also a very important point to point out, that for most of human history, if you couldn't pay your debt, there were no bankruptcy laws. You just became a slave, and your family became a slave. Yeah, they just enslaved everybody. And the idea was for you to pay back, this is to be done to pay back your debt, but because the interest ran away faster than you could ever work, you were just a slave forever because there was no way to pay it back. So Sumeria regularly ran into the problem of too much of the population turned into slaves because for whatever reason or another, they weren't able to pay their debts back. And so on a regular basis, or I guess a quasi-regular basis, the ruler of ancient Sumeria would decree a jubilee where all non-commercial debts were made null and void. And I want to bring that up because it's not like this student debt thing is a new problem. I mean, maybe the fact that it's student debt is a problem, but massive swaths of the population becoming in debt and therefore turning into slaves is not only not unnormal, it seems to be the norm in human history.
Yes, and Graeber writes about that in his book, that it was a common phenomenon for millennia, and it's happened to generations and generations of people over and over. And it's not necessarily always as easy as saying, well, they made a bad decision, so they need to suffer for it. In some cases, first of all, as we've discussed before, the banking system is a government agency, essentially. It's not really a private competitive business. It's a government agency with privileges granted by the government, the privilege of creating money, of directing spending. So the kinds of loans you make are, first of all, it's your responsibility to assess the borrower's ability to pay, but also you're in a privileged position. So, some peasant can't create money out of nothing, but a bank can. So the kind of interest you charge, the degree to which you abuse your ability to charge interest to begin with, these have been considerations for centuries, for probably more than centuries throughout history. And that's where usury comes into play. That's where there's been usury laws. I think in the U.S. there was usury laws until the 1980s or something like that. If I'm not mistaken.
I can't comment on that. I don't know.
Yeah, but that's what this was about. It was about recognizing that the banking system is in a privileged position, a privileged monopolistic or oligopolistic position, with special rights and privileges granted by the government. And so the loans they make, the interest they charge, they don't necessarily always come out of a competitive free market. They much rather come out of a position of hierarchy of, the banking system versus the peasants who had to borrow money to be able to buy and the machinery, or in ancient days, just very simplistic tools to work the fields.
In fact, hold that thought. It made me think of that. This is one of the openings to one of the chapters in Debt for the first 5,000 years. So this is
which chapter is it?
This is chapter 11, Age of the Great Capitalist Empires, page 307. 11 pesos then, as you can't pay me the 11 pesos, that makes another 11 pesos, 22 in all. 11 for the sarape and the patate, and 11 because you can't pay. Is that right, Crisiero? Crisiero had no knowledge of figures, so it was very natural that he said, "That is right, patron." Don Arnulfo, isn't my Spanish great? Don Arnulfo was a decent, honorable man. Other landowners were a good deal less soft-hearted with their peons. The shirt is 5 pesos, right? Very well. And as you can't pay for it, that's 5 pesos. And as you remain in my debt for the 5 pesos, that's 5 pesos. And as I shall never have the money from you, that's 5 pesos. So that makes 5 and 5 and 5 and 5. That's 20 pesos. Agreed? Yes, patron. Agreed. The peon can get the shirt nowhere else when he needs one. He can get the credit nowhere but from his master, for who he works and from whom he could never get away as long as he owes him a centavo. So,
yeah.
I think that illustrates very well what you just said, which is that the banking system, or just lending in general, the way money functions is like this arcane eldritch, weird understood thing not understood by the peasantry. And if you understand and you're like, okay, well, here's a loan for $10, but it's another $10 because you'll never be able to pay me back.
Right, and it gave me an interesting perspective on the economy as a whole, because we're always brought up with this idea the economy starts with two people trading. One has shoes, the other has chickens, so they're on equal footing and they just exchange goods of similar value. And so that's expanded is the economy as a whole. The free market economy, it's a beautiful system. We're all just exchanging goods and services. But the book Debt, the first 5,000 years, has given me the impression that the entire history of the economy is actually more like people trying to put other people in debt all the time. Yes. And everything else just derives out of that. The money system comes out of that. And then what we do with the money, investing, buying things, goods, comes out of just people putting other people in debt. That's the primary driver for the economic system of the world, for the history of economics, essentially.
And to that point is that, okay, so is it a situation where the peon, this guy here, and the master are on equal footing because they have equal negotiation power? Or is it that the master really has a lot more, the peon doesn't know what's going on, and then the master could just make up whatever he wants to trick the guy into accepting a massive debt, and then he can never pay it off, and that's the end of it?
Well, and also the debts are the monetary debts and numbers and math. They make it all seem so neutral and so rational and so normal. But what's behind these numbers is weaponry and oppression and threats of violence and enslavement and all these things, like what you just said, the peon and the master, but also the indentured serf and the indentured servant and the master. These are all non-monetary. I mean, the weaponry, the oppression, these are non-monetary phenomena. But then the monetary system, the debt system, was created to make it seem more harmless, to make it seem more rational, more mathematical, more sort of disinterested. Just, well, these are the numbers, so this is what we have to do.
Right, and it's an equal playing field. It's a system where one entity or one group of entities controls the entire ebb and flow of how this money moves. However, when you interact with it, it's an equal playing field, right? Well, like we said before, if the government this is all set up with the government demands a tax, and then the government has to give you the method by which you could pay that tax, a way to get the token to pay the tax. So the whole thing's set up by the government and institutions close to the government, like the private banking system, and that if you end up in a situation where you're really screwed up because you didn't play that game right, okay, yes, it's your fault that you didn't play that game right, but who told you how to play the game? I mean, other than weirdos like us who are trying to find people who know how to play the game and repeat it so other people can hear it, nobody knows how to play this game. Just like the dude who signed up for an impossible amount of debt to pay back.
Yeah, there has to be more of a recognition of the fact that there is this constant drive to make up excuses to put people in debt. Another anecdote that I just couldn't find it right now, but I'm just gonna go by memory, that Graeber cites in his book is about some Mesopotamian king or some Sumerian king who basically claimed that he owned some land that was occupied by some other king, right? And he needed a pretext to go to war to take over that land. So then what he did was he just calculated all the grains that he missed out on farming from that land, and then
plus their interest,
plus compounding interest over time, and it came up with a completely ridiculous sum.
Yeah, in the trillions for ancient Sumeria or some ridiculousness like that.
Today would be like, okay, you owe me $500 quadrillion in debt now. Okay, so what are we going to do? Well, there was never the intention of actually coming up with some rational figure that can be paid off. It was just created as a pretext for one king to go to war against the other king. Yes. So, he's not paying his debts. Let's go to war, let's smash him, let's take back our land.
And then, the question naturally arises, why do we all need to be in debt for, I mean, again, going back to the student thing, right? Why do we need all these debts? I mean, standing up from up top and looking down below and saying, okay, looking at the cosmos of the economy, why does everybody need to be in debt? If we understand that money creation is just a credit thing, and if we could create the money the right way and send it in the right directions, nobody should have to be in debt for something like this. And I think the answer you've already answered is that for the most of history, money systems have been garnered around how do we get as many people in debt as possible to turn them into slaves.
Mm-hmm. And to just make very convenient income without having to really, to do much.
Exactly. Well, and then bankruptcy laws have obviously. I didn't recognize the value of bankruptcy laws until I read this book. Right, because before bankruptcy laws, like I said, you couldn't pay your debt. Well, you just get to be a slave and you're done. But the idea of a bankruptcy law flips it around, like Nima was saying earlier, onto the creditor side to force the creditor to assess whether or not this is a good lending risk, right? And so, whatever criticism that we could have today of the current system, like the fact that we have bankruptcy laws is a massive, massive thing. And with the student debt specifically, and I guess alimony and child support are kind of sort of on this periphery, but with student debt specifically, because you can't bankrupt out of it, it's starting to look more and more like the ancient times. You can't, we're going to give you a debt that you can't pay off. And then because you can't pay it off, we're going to garnish your wages. You can't afford to get married. Maybe in this state you can't get your driver's license and whatever else they do to you when you can't pay the thing off. And especially when you recognize the fact that the government can go, yeah, you know what, just forget all of it. They can just snap their fingers and all the debts are free. And there isn't that big of a blowback for it. Again, I would not want it. I would not want the Jubilee to happen without some sort of structural changes to prevent it from happening again. But again, like I said, the government regularly spends $1 billion on world-destroying shit. You can't, free the most productive aspect of your society to be economically productive again.
Right. It's a way of basically making the peasants rebel against the peasants,
I mentioned this to Tommy in the show when I was on his show, So Tommy, his show's called Tommy Nation Politics. I don't even know how he found us. And he's a progressive guy, and I don't know why he wanted to be on the show several times now, but we found ourselves agreeing on almost everything the other night because I realized that once you understand how the monetary system works, you see that this left-right conservative liberal boxing match that's been happening is a boxing match over nothing. And I wonder how much of it is for just the ruling class to say, okay, they don't understand the system, the peons don't understand the system, so that we can get them to fight over nothing. And the nothing I'm talking about is, for example, if we talk about student debt, Tommy even brought this up. We should have got the video up ready for this, where it was Bernie Sanders making fun of Ted Cruz. And because Ted Cruz released, I think, a campaign video or something criticizing the Biden administration for offering this $10,000 to $20,000 of student debt relief, which I don't believe he ever would. By the way, that's just a fake thing that he's trying to get the left to vote for him, and then he's going to completely or left to vote for the left, and then after the midterms, he's going to completely forget about it, just like he did after the presidential run. So I think that's totally fake. I don't believe him at all. Oh, did you find it?
I have the video, but I need to find the segment.
Okay, so I'll just keep talking about it. So Ted Cruz comes on making fun of the idea of student debt forgiveness, and basically bringing up the trope of someone's smoking weed in his mom's
the
basement.
dumb barista. If the dumb barista could get off the bong for a second,
Yeah.
Which something like that.
Maybe there's somebody out there that fits that description. I'm sure there is. And then what Bernie Sanders did is he took this video and he had a contrasting video to it where he's at like this town hall for nurses or something, and he's letting all these nurses tell their stories about how they're working 473,000 hours a week, and they have more debt than they could pay off. And
okay, I have it. I have it. Let's
let's just play the thing. Go ahead and share your screen.
Let me just.
I thought it was very effective. This could be very effective. For
1 second. I'm about to share.
I got it muted. I have you muted, Nima. So just give me the thumbs up when you're ready.
He loves Hillary Clinton. Yeah.
Or that.
I want to show his
campaign
ad. Ted Cruz got.
Or that slacker barista.
Nurse at Temple, and as part of our contract, like our build up to our contract campaign, we polled our members about their student debt because we're going to be demanding that the employer also offset the debt, right? And so 120 of our members had a total of $7 million in nursing debt, in student debt.
These are nurses?
Yeah, these are nurses. And you have to have a college degree to be a nurse, and we're struggling in the hospital.
All right.
We need more nurses.
Who wasted 7 years in college studying completely useless things, now has loans and can't get a job. Joe Biden just gave you 20 grand.
I have like $88,000 of debt that's just increased year after year.
They increase. That increases
yeah, because
interest rates.
They're all federal loans.
Yeah.
Some of them have 6-7% interest. I mean, we put off buying a house. I'm in my 30s. Put off buying a house. Put off getting married for a while. Don't know if we can have kids because student debt is, it's just overwhelming. And now as a union organizer, I'm explicitly excluded from the public service loan forgiveness program.
Like, holy cow, 20 grand. That, maybe you weren't going to vote in November and suddenly you just got 20 grand. And, if you can, get off the bong for a minute and head down to the voting station or just send in your mail-in ballot that the Democrats have helpfully sent you, it could drive up turnout, particularly among young people.
My student loan payments every month are double my rent. About $1,100.
You pay $1,100 every month for student debt.
And I refinanced, yeah.
What does that mean in terms of your financial situation in your life?
I'm working 2 jobs now, and that's going to be my future for a while.
So vote for Bernie Sanders. No. That's not what we're saying. But I think this was an excellent video of they're both right and they're both wrong. I think Ted Cruz is absolutely right that this is just here's some money, vote for me from Joe Biden, because I don't think he's going to actually give him the money, and that there are perverse incentives at the idea of, okay, you took on this whole debt and we're just going to forgive it. However, on the flip side, I think Bernie Sanders is right that this is he did say this specifically. He's trying to demonstrate it, right? That, okay, here's very hardworking people of society, supposedly these nurses, that they can't buy a house, they can't have kids because they have these restrictive loans, these student loans that prevent them from doing that. And okay, so it turns into this left-right slog out. But again, once you understand the monetary system and you say, okay, this is just money, it's already been extended, and to forgive it, you just flick a switch, and that things aren't on a level playing field, like you said, in terms of the free market. There is a top-down system where money is created, and and it's not a meritocracy. It's a violent top-down system that goes back ages, and it was never about meritocracy. The meritocracy is for the little playground that is the free market economy. But the parameters surrounding it, the parameters that created it, were all conquest, domination, weaponry, hierarchy, etc. Yes. So, again,
by the way, so number one, Bernie Sanders is such a sellout that I don't, like you said, don't believe a word. That I don't believe he gives a shit about any of these people that he's talking to there. He's put there to put some people at ease, maybe. But
just make sure you vote for Hillary Clinton after he loses.
Yeah, and make sure you donate to his campaign so all the money can go to Joe Biden and whoever else. And then he's not going to do anything about it. He's going to fuck you over and pretend like it never happened. I mean, it's disgusting. But anyway, number two, we have a chat from Julie Nichols. Okay, so she made the point. I have been debt-free for more than a decade, but because of it, I have no credit score, so I can't purchase a vehicle or a house, even though I have been on the same job for 22 years and make enough money. So obviously, when I moved to the US, I had the same problem. I had no credit, and what I did was I just got a credit card with a $300 limit, a very low deposit. I actually had to give the bank a deposit,
right,
cash deposit. And so I just started using that credit card and paying off the low balances that I had. And then they would start, at one point, they will give me my deposit back. At one point, they will start, and then you have some credit and they'll start raising the limit and so on and so forth. That's just one of the things that I don't know if you ever taught that in elementary school or high school.
Taught that in elementary school. No.
So that's just one of the things that you have to do in order to start building some credit, whether you need it or not, because down the road it'll be helpful. It'll put you on a better footing. It'll give you measurable advantages. And
I can give an even better strategy than that. I did the same thing until I learned about this one. This is a much more effective method that I did, is that if you know somebody who has a credit card, and here's the magical things that you need. A credit card that's over 10 years old, has at least a $10,000 limit on it, and is currently being used about 10%. If you know somebody who fits that, and if you get that person to put you on as an authorized user of that card, they don't need to give you the card. Like, have the card mailed to them and you never see it, right? They just put your name on that card. You inherit that person's entire credit history for that card. So instead of going, okay, how do I do the $300 thing, secured credit thing, and slowly build it up, you could start, instead of starting here and going, you could start up here and go a lot faster. So this is not financial advice. That's just what I did myself. But it works really well. But I want to read what she said for. I've been debt-free for more than a decade, but because of it, I have had no credit score. So this is actually a battle that I went back and forth with myself for a while. No, I didn't even go back and forth. I was committed to having no debt, no credit whatsoever. I didn't have a credit card until I was like 28. And when I went to apply for my first credit something, I had no credit report. It didn't exist. Like there was literally nothing in there. And I had patted myself on the back for that for a long time. But honestly, we're not saying that all credit is bad. You got to be able to make smart choices with the credit. And having a credit report or, having that backdrop to yourself to say, okay, now I want to go buy a house, or now I want to start a business, or now I need this, that, or the other thing, and you've actually made a smart choice, right? You're not just like loading yourself up on consumer debt. You want to have that backing, right? Because, I mean, we've got a screwed up system, but if you understand how the rules work, you can utilize that to your own advantage. And in fact, if you do understand how the rules work, the system can work pretty well for you. It's just that, as we mentioned at the beginning of this, the system also includes an educational system that makes sure you understand how none of this works.
Yeah, an educational system, which, by the way, the word education goes back to two Latin words, the word ex and the word ducare. Ex is to lead out, X is out, and ducare is to lead.
That's interesting.
So education leads you out of something. But what does it lead you out of? Does it lead you out of ignorance or out of knowledge? I don't know. They don't say, right? They just call it education, and it could be either. And in many cases, it's unfortunately, it leads you away from knowledge and into the darkness, when the true education is the opposite, should be the opposite of that. Learning, should be the opposite of that.
So I don't know how well we've made a conservative argument for student debt relief, but I do want to emphasize the point that I don't think this is a conservative and progressive issue, because again, once you understand how the money system works, and this is probably the same for goddamn almost every issue that there is, right? Is that there's the way that it's been painted, which is completely inaccurate from reality, which is what we end up fighting over, or what we're supposed to fight over, and then there's the way it actually works, which is the way that the oligarchs either hide or obfuscate in some way, and they say, okay, while they're fighting over this, we can make that happen, and they're not going to notice because they don't understand how to look at it correctly. And so I think this is an up-down issue, not a right-left issue.
Yeah, there is a hierarchy of information to be generous. It's probably more like a hierarchy of disinformation that works 24/7 to make sure that you don't get the information, you, Julie, and whoever else, that you don't get the information that will be helpful for you to make better decisions down the road. And just knowing that fact will already open so many doors to you. Just having that skepticism towards the stories you're told, and especially the stories you're told by the people you trust the most, and the people you trust most unquestioningly. Having that idea that maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe I should question precisely the people who seem the most trustworthy to me right now. Mm-hmm. Maybe I should question precisely the things that I've never, ever questioned, and that I've been told to never question, because what I'm currently doing doesn't seem to be helping me very much. What I'm currently doing, it doesn't seem to be working very well. And none of it makes sense to me. It's all very confusing. Well, that means that they're doing a good job at keeping people down.
And they've been doing a good job for a long time. We just talked about ancient Sumeria and how they more or less did the same thing that they're doing now.
Yeah.
Anyway, Nima, you got anything else to add to that?
I'm sure I do.
Oh, yeah, well, he's reaching for the book. Everybody run away.
No,
No, what
Well,
was it? Now that you do reach for the book, and I'm flipping it around, is there anything else on the idea of debt in general to bring up? Because I think simply the point that in general debt has been used as a method of slavery.
Yeah. So one more thing about the inflation argument about student debt relief is inflationary because all these students can go out and spend like wild. Well, on the other hand, there's going to be a bank that has to write down the debt that's canceled. They can't earn interest on the debt that's canceled. That's actually a deflationary event. So let's say I give you the inflationists, let's say I give you maybe there's some inflation from the spending that comes from the individual who now has money freed up. But I also match you the write-downs that the banks have to make in order to address the jubilee of all the student loans. At the end of the day, it's not going to matter all that much. It's not what this is about. It's not going to be inflation or deflationary. The two cancel each other out to some extent. But what does matter, to us at least, is that there's more money in the private sector that can go to real businesses and real everything, real workers, real businessmen, real farmers, real anything really, versus it disappearing on some federal government balance sheet where it's not needed anyway, because the government can create the money that it spends. And if that's new to you, obviously go back to one of the dozens of shows where we talk about modern monetary theory, MMT, and that is the symbol for freedom, right? That's the Sumerian.
This is Amagi that I got pulled up. It's some ancient Cuneiform form, and I bring it up because not only did I get this from Carol Quigley, David Graeber mentions it in his book in a way that Carol Quigley doesn't. So this is the oldest written known word for freedom, and David Graeber points out that this is specifically freedom from debt.
Yeah.
The oldest known word for freedom that we have access to specifically denotes freedom from debt. Now, and this totally makes sense because in ancient Sumeria, where you regularly needed debt jubilees because so much of the population became debt slaves, that you would need a word like this.
Right.
And I think we're in a situation where we need a word like this again.
Yeah. Freedom from debt, that's what the word originally meant. That's exactly it. And it also seems like they really like trumpets, the Sumerians, because the entire cuneiform looks like different arrangements of trumpets, basically, to me.
Do you know why that's the case?
Because that's how you carve, right? That's
the shape of the reed. That's the shape of the reed that they would stamp it with. The shape of a trumpet. No, I mean, you know what I mean? Like a reed, like that comes out of the water. It's a plant that comes out of the water. Yeah. It does look like a trumpet. I agree. Yeah. And then I want to show it again because I think I had my camera up while that was happening. Stand by. Let's share this, and then let me go back here. Oh, participants consent. You know what? I don't think anybody saw it at all. Son of a bitch. Because the way that I have my settings set up. Nima sees it. Okay, well, sorry for everybody who didn't see that, but...
Well, I mean, just share your screen, and they'll see it.
No, I did, but all the crazy settings that I have set up through OBS right now, it doesn't work that way.
Okay, then you show it, and I'll share the screen. Then people will see it.
How about this? I'll send it to you on Telegram.
No, just show what you had right now, and then I'll share my screen.
Okay.
Let's see if that works.
Let's see if that works. Okay, so here. Share this that way.
Oh, I can't share while you're sharing.
Well, shit. Okay, sorry everybody, we got y'all excited for nothing, but if you look up Amagi, AMAGI on Google, you'll find exactly what it is. So anyway, last call, Nima.
I have it now.
Oh, okay. There it is. Amagi. Freedom from slavery. Specifically.
Freedom from debt.
Yeah. Well, freedom from debt and therefore freedom from the slavery.
Well, I mean, I think maybe it's not a bad idea to just end with that lengthy
Go for it.
Ending of Graeber's book. So this is once again David Graeber. May he rest in peace. Dead the first 5,000 years. This is the ending of his book, basically, right before the afterword begins, I guess. In this book, I have largely avoided making concrete proposals, but let me end with one. It seems to me that we are long overdue for some kind of biblical-style jubilee, one that would affect both international debt and consumer debt. It would be salutary, not just because it would relieve so much genuine human suffering, but also because it would be our way of reminding ourselves that money is not ineffable, that paying one's debts is not the essence of morality, that all these things are human arrangements, and that if democracy is to mean anything, it is the ability to all agree to arrange things in a different way. It is significant, I think, that since Hammurabi, great imperial states have almost invariably resisted this kind of politics. Athens and Rome established the paradigm even when confronted with continual debt crises. They insisted on legislating around the edges, softening the impact, eliminating obvious abuses like debt slavery, using the spoils of empire to throw all sorts of extra benefits at their poorer citizens, who after all provided the rank and file of their armies, so as to keep them more or less afloat. But all in such a way as never to allow a challenge to the principle of debt itself. The governing class of the United States seems to have taken a remarkably similar approach, eliminating the worst abuses, e.g. debtors' prisons, using the fruits of empire to provide subsidies, visible and otherwise, to the bulk of the population. In more recent years, manipulating currency rates to flood our country with cheap goods from China, but never allowing anyone to question the sacred principle that we must all pay our debts. At this point, however, the principle has been exposed as a flagrant lie. As it turns out, we don't all have to pay our debts. Only some of us do. Nothing would be more important than to wipe the slate clean for everyone, mark a break with our accustomed morality, and start again. What is a debt anyway? A debt is just a perversion of a promise. It is a promise corrupted by both math and violence. If freedom, real freedom, is the ability to make friends, then it is also necessarily the ability to make real promises. What sorts of promises might genuinely free men and women make to one another? At this point, we can't even say. It's more a question of how we can get to a place that will allow us to find out. And the first step in that journey in turn is to accept that in the largest scheme of things, just as no one has the right to tell us our true value, no one has the right to tell us what we truly owe.
And with that, this has been Dylan Moore and Nima Major of iRead It TV here doing it live. You can check us out at irreadit.tv at our various social media. And now that we're back on YouTube, you can check us out there too. And you can find us at irreadit.tv. And thank you for watching. And we'll have Bill O'Reilly see us out. We'll see you next time.
We'll do it live. Okay. We'll do it live. Fuck it. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live.